Good afternoon. I was told I'm not allowed to show my 45 slides that the team presented and prepared, so I will try to keep this brief. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, honored commissioners, members of the European Parliament, representatives of the European institutions, national governments, industry, civil society, it is a privilege to join you today at this Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. And I guess no one could have planned it for a better timing, given that we are coming together in exceptional times. Geopolitical shifts are in full swing. Fundamental beliefs that we grew up with over the last decades are changing as we speak and in record times. The political and economic power of Europe is on the line. We heard this many, many times, but most notably in global trade environment that just turned from a rules-based system that we so much love, and I dare to say in the Silicon Valley of regulation, towards a power-based trade system. Last week, many people around the globe questioned the ability of the EU of finding agreements that held up. Last Friday, I think quite a lot, and I'm also part of the pharmaceutical sector, had questions whether whatever has been agreed is still valid. And it was based on an assumption that Europe is weak. Well, they were wrong. Europe is not weak. But if this episode tells us one thing, is that Europe needs to be strong to have influence. It needs to be politically, economically, democratically, and socially strong to have its voice heard around the globe in a context of an increasing fragmented world. That's why the question of this week, the question of a competitive Europe, is the most relevant of our time. Again, we have heard this many, many times, but we need to strengthen our resilience to becoming more competitive and sustainable at the same time. And for this, we need to act, and we need to act fast. Ladies and gentlemen, we grew up in peaceful times in Europe. That has changed with the war at our borders. We grew up with unwavering security guarantees through a powerful alliance, and at least to some extent, this perception at least has changed. We grew up with companies such as ours living in a rules-based trade system under rules of organizations such as the World Trade Organizations, on just-in-time supply chains, and on a world where we were used to open borders and open markets. That is changing too. So in these exceptional times of multiple crises, people question the European Union instead of strengthening it. Some try even to divide it. But I'm convinced that more than ever, we need more Europe rather than less. But it has to be stronger, it has to be more future-proof, and it has to act faster. For this, we need not only be great in analysis, because we have heard these words too many times. In the discussion around competitiveness, Mario Draghi was right 1 year ago, and he is still right. We urgently need to deepen the internal market and focus on better funding for enterprises by implementing an EU savings and investment union. In the discussion about new technologies, the critics are right. Europe is too slow, too bureaucratic, and sometimes even too unambitious. While others thrive in innovation and disruption, we tend to regulate and defend. This is not how we are going to define the future. One example, and I dare to say, in the discussion of prices for medicine, a business that I'm into and that our company is into, it is true that we see a global imbalance in the funding of research and innovation. But Europe countries can and should strengthen these investments in the development of new treatments, reevaluate the way how they value innovation, and not only talk about resilience, but really mean what they say. More resilience is not about isolation. Europe must remain a champion of free trade. Trade deals like Mercosur are not a threat for us. They are strengthening us. Europe must, and I'm convinced will, continue to pursue ambitious trade agreements that open markets, secure supply chains, and create opportunities not only for businesses, but also for the people that are working in those companies, whether they be small or large. Well, there will be a lot of analysis, but what are we do? I would like to take two quick examples, because I know I'm running out of time to present here, but I think in the sector of agriculture, something that is a popular part in discussions in and about Europe, we can see those tendencies. Farmers, not only in Europe, face unprecedented pressure to produce more with less. Less land, less water, fewer inputs, while the climate grows harsher by the year. And yet, with innovation, agriculture can move from being part of the problem to become part of the solution. And I'm proud to say that Europe will surely leave its marks at COP30 in Belém. Think of biotechnology, think about crops that could use nitrogen more efficient, plants that are resilient to drought and heat. Those are things that are being developed and researched in Europe, but unfortunately, we're too slow to get them to the market. The current push for simplification is a unique chance to streamline and speed up approval processes, and we have seen in the COVID crisis that Europe can and is able to produce safety as well as speed at the same time. When we look into the framework for new genomic techniques, we hope that they will be adopted without further delays. If we truly believe in agriculture as a strategic sector for Europe, our policies must reflect that. The same logic applies for health. Europe has world-class science, fantastic universities, super motivated young people, but too often these excellent stalls and the lab that has this wonderful ideas and developments is moved to countries outside of the EU, into regions where discoveries turn into life-changing medicines and profitable companies. Cell and gene therapies offer breakthroughs that could slow, prevent, and even reverse diseases. But let me be very clear. If Europe continues to regulate yesterday's risks, while others build tomorrow's cures, we will continue to fall behind. Here, intellectual property plays a decisive role. It gives innovators confidence to invest in high-risk, high-reward science, and it enables us to early knowledge sharing these progresses to also serve the society. To achieve a vision for Europe that is really an enabling environment, one needs to build regulatory agility, attract investments, and have attractive investment conditions and collaborative ecosystems. Such an environment will accelerate the translation of research and in vaccines into treatments and cures, and ensure that patients will continue to gain timely access to innovation. Now, as my time is running out, ladies and gentlemen, I'm more than happy to attend this conference, and we were happy to be part of a lot of discussions, surely analysis, and I know there will be a great panel following me, but really this is a call for actions because we are seeing more and more people moving and questioning the ability of Europe to really be different than just slow. And to close, one great European, and as a young German, I saw him quite often. Helmut Kohl once said, "The strength of Europe lies in its ability to learn from its past and shape a better future." There is no better quote for what is lying ahead of us when it comes to competitive Europe. Thank you very much for listening. I wish us all a fantastic conference and, more importantly, actions that will come out of this. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next session on Europe's new food equation. My name is Bartosz Brzeziński, and I cover agri-food-related topics at POLITICO. When Brussels talks about competitiveness and security, the focus is often on defense, energy, or tech. But food belongs on that list too, or at least so I hear whenever I talk to people here in Brussels. The war in Ukraine, climate shocks, and farmers' protests have shown just how fragile the food system can be. This session comes as the European Commission has just proposed its vision for the EU's farm budget after 2027. Agriculture Commissioner Christoph Hansen insists it's not a budget cut, and that it strengthens competitiveness and keeps climate ambition intact. Let's test that claim. Please welcome our panelists. Starting from on my left, Dacian Ciolos, former European Commission for Agriculture, former MEP with the Liberal Group, and former Prime Minister of Romania. Next to him, we have Marco Contiero from Greenpeace. He's the EU Agriculture Policy Director. And to his left, Jens Hartmann, Head of Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Bayer Crop Science. The EU is rewriting its farm policy for after 2027. Commissioner Hansen insists this new vision will strengthen competitiveness without sacrificing environmental or social ambition. Mr. Ciolos, from your perspective, will Hansen's vision actually get Europe there, or is Brussels moving in the wrong direction?
No, the vision of Commissioner Hansen is a good one. The problem is that there is a difference between the statements in the Commission and the content of the legislative proposals. With the legislative proposals on MFF package, including agriculture, in my opinion, this is the beginning of the end of a common agricultural policy. A sectoral common agricultural policy will be transformed in a sectoral program, among others, in the budget. And agriculture, maybe with the fishery policy, are the only one connected on the meantime to the market and the social and environmental objectives that we have. So if we separate these two, we risk to have a disturbance on the market, and we risk to lose a lot of farmers. And you know, in agriculture, once you lose some farmers, they will not come back. This is the specificity to work with natural resources. So for me, this is the risk that I don't see this vision that the Commissioner Hansen presented in the springtime. I don't see this translated in the budgetary proposal, having a combination of about our objective to produce food, to produce non-food agricultural production, because agriculture can contribute also to energy production, to some bioeconomy industries, and also to combine this objective to increase competitiveness of our agriculture, the resilience, economic resilience of our agriculture, and to have a good management of natural resources, because the soil, the water, the biodiversity are not only public goods, but they are also factors of production for our farmers. And this vision, it's absent from the proposal when you put in the same package all the budget, and to leave the responsibility, the common European responsibility, to leave it to the member states to decide how they will share this money. You imagine what should happen on the market if one farmer is paid in a certain level, and in another member state the government decides to pay less or to pay more, and even to add some state aid. We risk to have big disturbance on the market just because this political decision to deal with the budget.
So if you used to be in Hansen's shoes, if you were still commissioner today, what would you do differently? Short answer.
I would connect agriculture with other policies, with trade policy, with environmental and climate change policy, with energy policy, having a different system to pay the farmers, more to what they are doing, so to rethink the income of farmers related to what they sell on the market and the service that they provide, and to transform what we have today, direct payments, in more incentive approach, and to also give the dignity to the farmers, because now the perception in the society is that the direct payments are a social support for them, which is not right. But we need more clarity on what we use, the way we use this budget, and also I would think to an investment policy, maybe connected to competitiveness fund and other funds, in order to stimulate farmers to invest in digitalization, in integrating new technologies, more more in harmony with good management of natural resources, and also to adapt our trade policy and trade agreements to this objective, long-term objective to ensure strategic autonomy for some key products.
Marco, I saw you maybe nodding along a bit. Do you see this new proposal, this new common agricultural policy proposal for after 2027? Where is the climate ambition? Where is the environmental ambition in it?
Indeed, I have to say I almost could repeat your speech. There are some interesting policy options chosen by the Commission. This proposal is clearly more targeted than the one that we currently have. We do see this attempt to have a better focus on farmers who need the most support. There are interesting, also from an environmental point of view, provisions in terms of, for instance, the aspect of allowing farmers to come out with transition plans and then receiving support for that. However, the main concern, the main problem is that because of the way in which the budget has been, the part of the budget that will be devoted to CAP, a bit less than 300 billion, it has been structured. Eventually, we're going to have a big part given to farmers as today as an hectare-based payment, irrespective of what farmers do. And then the remaining, it depends how much member states will use, but the remaining 20% more or less will have to be divided between agro-environmental policy decisions, investment support, support for areas of natural constraints, knowledge and innovation spreading, etc., etc. So many different, extremely important, mandatory measures that member states are supposed to take will have to just manage a very tiny part of the budget. And today, in the CAP that is actually implemented, 32% of the budget is devoted to environmental payments, whether in the first pillar with eco schemes and the second pillar with agri-environmental measures. De facto, it is very possible that once this CAP is implemented, if it stays as it is, we're going to see disappearing the whole budget dedicated today to environmental action. And this would be a disaster, clearly.
Jens, you represent one of the biggest companies involved in the agricultural sector, Bayer. When you look at this proposal from a kind of business side, will farmers become more competitive thanks to the policies being proposed by Brussels?
Yeah, good question, Bartosz. The way we're looking at it, and going perhaps half a step back, how you introduced the discussion, talking about resilience in the ag sector. No? And we have all experienced how fragile the whole food system is here. We saw it, or we see it with climate change, then we saw geopolitical, and now trade. Now, how do we address this? There are two aspects to it. The one is through innovation, driving innovation in agriculture. The other one is through policy and frameworks. Now, looking at innovation, and that brings then the bridge back to CAP and the way it's supposed to be, is on the one hand side, farmers need stability. No? They need also, to a certain extent, the assurance with regard to the business they're in, that it's remaining a viable, a professional, and a profitable business going forward. On the other hand side, farmers also need, and we are proposing very much an incentivization scheme towards innovation. So how can we ensure that farmers are recognized and appreciated for driving sustainable agriculture going forward with new tools? And last but not least, which is also very, very important, is that if you look at CAP, you need to ensure that you've got place for additional revenue streams. And I think, Bartosz, you mentioned that, Marco, you talked about that as well. And we look at it, for example, through carbon farming. To what extent do we incentivize farmers opening up additional revenue streams to keep their profession, to keep agriculture a profitable business going forward? So that's a little bit how we would look at it, but most importantly really is the recognition and incentivization towards innovation, which drives resilience in agriculture, and that's innovation across all technologies, ultimately. No? It's seeds, it's new breeding technologies, it's crop protection, it's biologics, it's the entire toolbox.
You've all touched upon this theme of resilience, Mr. Challis. What's the single biggest vulnerability in the European food system? And is the Commission addressing it effectively?
There are several, in my opinion. There are vulnerabilities related to the market, to the unpredictability of market for reasons connected to climate change. This is more and more present on the spot, and not only in some regions, but all across Europe, droughts or floods or fires and so on. So this is a big problem to deal with, and we see that the private insurance company don't cover all these risks. So we should imagine a system combining what private sector can provide with what we can do with public money. Then it's a question of generational renewable. This is a big risk, in my opinion, for European agriculture, because European farmers are more and more older, and we have difficulties to find young farmers to come in this activity, also because of unpredictability in this activity. Unpredictability connected to the market, but also lack of vision and visibility about how the income can be built for farmers. And this is why I think before to stimulate young farmers to come, we should deal with the way that we ensure a stable and predictable income for farmers related to the market, and also related to the payments of public goods. And we should create new markets of carbon absorption, of biodiversity maintaining, of management of the landscape in some area, which is very important. All these activities, or all these goods, public goods, are connected to activity of farmers together with the production of food. And as I mentioned, we don't discuss enough about bioeconomy, about non-food agriculture production. We have a lot of commitment in the circular economy in Europe, and agriculture can contribute to them, but we have to be clear how we will pay this for farmers, and also energy production and so on. So this is a large approach that we have to have about farmers in order to give predictability.
Marco, do you find that there is enough recognition of the investment needs in these different challenges when you talk to policymakers, lawmakers?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think there is enough, even in society, but also in the political circle here in Brussels, commitment and understanding of the problems that we're facing when discussing about climate change. We do see, finally, I would say, in Europe as well now, since a few years, the real impact of climate change. But if you look at some figures, the EA came out with the calculations on this Monday and also before. We have seen, first of all, the problem related to the lack of implementation of environmental legislation in Europe cost, Commissioner Roosevelt told us, 180 billion a year. The cost of implementing is 122, if I'm not mistaken, billion, which means that Europe, if it invests into implementing environmental legislation, would, for every 10 euros, get 15 euros in avoided costs. That's a pretty good economic. But when it comes only and exclusively to climate change, we've seen in the 80s, we were facing weather events imposing cost of 8.5 billion a year. As of 2022, we are talking about 45 to 48 billion every single year, and it's only going to be up. That's why I go back to the CAP, for example. And what my colleagues have said, we need to provide incentives to farmers and landowners to do to change their practices, and it's not something easy. It requires convincing, it requires encouragement, it requires money. We cannot provide incentives without providing money for that transition that we ask businesses to do. We have to provide them a vision, and we have to provide them the tools to get to that vision. I don't think that policies such as the CAP or a lot of the omnibus deregulation that we are witnessing in these very weeks in Brussels is going in that direction.
Well, that's something that even Commissioner Hansen talks about, needing to tap into private investments. But coming back to resilience, Jens, from the industry side, what are some of the most concrete innovations or solutions that you can bring to increase that resilience? Carbon farming seems to always be a discussion that will happen someday, but first we have to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And carbon farming is not necessarily addressing the resilience in agriculture. No? The resilience in ag addressing climate change is really around new breeding techniques. How do you make your crops heat resistant, drought resistant, water resistant? It's about how do you allow access to new modern technologies, even in the crop protection sector. If you look at Europe in the last 5 years, we haven't seen any new molecules being registered in the marketplace. To the contrary, I think the industry overall lost 80 or so products. So it's that combination of innovation which drives ultimately the resilience and which addresses climate change, together with, and you talked earlier about competitiveness. Now, what does farmers in Europe really concern from a competition point of view? Also, when you look at agricultural resilience, it's the access or the speed of access to new technologies. And there we come to omnibus, and there we come to the regulatory framework and the element of, or the angle of how can we have a more efficient regulatory system to maintain that competitiveness in Europe compared to other geographies by farmers just having timely access to new technologies. No? And then last but not least, in terms of challenges, what you asked to ag food systems, I completely agree to Bartosz, what you are saying. The aging farming population is a massive challenge in Europe. And why doesn't the younger generation get more into farming? It's on the one hand side, of course, that predictability element. To what extent do I enter a sector which gives me midterm solid and forecastable financial returns? And at the same time also the entire element of to what extent is agriculture and to what extent are farmers actually recognized in society. And we just need to remember the farmer protests we had here. It was 2 years ago or so. It was a lot about, is farming or are farmers actually recognized as a very, very important and strong contributor to food security in Europe? So that would be a little bit my take and my angle to it.
Well, you alluded to the slow approvals of some of these new technologies. Access to new technologies is an issue. If approvals were faster, what's one innovation that farmers could tap into tomorrow?
Well, it's probably not a matter of tomorrow, but it's in general access to new crop protection products, access to biologics, access to seeds, to better genetics who have climate resilience traits in there. It's the entire portfolio of a toolbox which a farmer needs to address resilience in agriculture.
Mr. Challis, do you think the Commission is doing enough to provide that? I mean, they also talk about this access to new technologies, new genomic techniques, new pesticides. Do you find that policymakers today are giving enough of a toolbox to farmers?
I don't think it's so much the Commission fault. It's more about our decisional process, sensitivities of some subject in some areas of society. Some member states are more open than others to that, and this is why we have some blockages in some political debates. And I think we need debates, open debates and discussion about that, because sometimes we deal with some prejudgments on NGTs, for example. I remember we had a lot of discussion connected this with GMO, but we have some new technologies today which are not so much understood and discussed in the society, because finally, the politicians are very sensitive to the signals coming from the society. And we have, in the last decades, more and more a short-term political approach, because the politicians are thinking to the next elections, and instead to project a sector to the future, they are dealing or not with some sensitive subject, depending on how close the discussion is to the elections and how the people will react. And this is one of the reasons why we have difficulties to take strategical decision and to implement a vision. We are good to elaborate a vision on the paper, but then it's more difficult to implement this. And the farmers pay the price.
Marco, you hear technologies, you hear new molecules. Where do you draw the line? Where does innovation fit the sustainability vision that you from Greenpeace advocate, and where is it going? Where is it crossing the line?
Yeah, I mean, you use the right verb. I hear a lot. I've been in Brussels for the past 22 years, and I've heard technology and technological innovation constantly. What I've heard much less is other type of innovation, which is not technological. That's the first important part. So all the social innovation that we have seen actually happening. For instance, farmers starting farmers markets and having direct processing and all sorts of other societal and social, the food council in many cities, etc. So that innovation has never been discussed. And then when it comes to resilience, which is the term that the UN and Jens also used, what I would like to hear more about is how to ensure that we get to have resilient farming systems. Because when you're facing drought, then you might have, it's not so easy with genetic engineering, but to a certain extent it's possible, you can have a plant that has a better chances to resist to a drought period. But we're not just facing droughts. We are facing erratic weather conditions. We're facing drought, we're facing floods, we're facing early rain, we're facing late frost. This is what climate change brings to us. And if you have a resilient system, a system where the focus is on soil organic matter, fertility, the stability of the system, then your plants, and if you input much more diversity in the field, then your field and your landscape will be much more resilient. That's something that, especially in Brussels, very, very few politicians talk about. And I would like to have, because it's scientifically speaking 100% solid. It's been shown that resilient systems react to shocks, climatic shocks, much better than monoculture or genetically identical plants, without even going into the debate. And then on NGTs, just one clarification. The debate right now is whether NGTs should be risk assessed, traced, and labeled or not. We're not talking about banning or not banning them. And even there, unfortunately, the debate is quite simple. It's been addressed in a very simplistic way by saying, we must have these technologies. Yes, we must have the technologies, we must trace them, we must label them, and then also see whether farmers want to use them or not and how effective they are.
At one point, Jens, I saw you nodding along. What's your take?
Yeah, my take, I'm very much in sync with Marco, what you're saying, that the resilience piece and basically the element of regen ag, no? Regenerative ag. So it's not only about producing more on the same amount of land, but it's that whole thinking process, an element about how can we produce more whilst we restore more in nature. And that's when you get immediately, of course, on the one hand side into the toolbox discussion, but on the other hand side into a crop system approach, where you not necessarily look at only one season, but you look at the entire crop rotation, the crop cycles, and then we're coming back to cap and incentivization. So that's where the loop kind of closes. Okay. How can you drive through a policy framework and incentivization scheme the resilience adaptation through regenerative ag? That's why I was basically nodding what you said.
I wanted to come back to where we started with the common agricultural policy. You mentioned the social element of it. That is it a social support system? or is it supposed to be kind of feeding into the competitiveness of the sector? What is its role? Where do you see the role of the CAP, of the Common Agricultural Policy?
So even thinking to the income of farmers, they have a social dimension also, because when we look on the European treaty related to food, and the Common Agricultural Policy, the objectives are to ensure enough food and affordable food for all citizens, and in parallel to be able also to provide a good and stable income for farmers. But if this income of farmers is ensured by only direct payments, the perception in society is that we give money to the farmers for nothing. And this is the big problem, in my opinion, for now at least 2 decades, the public debate about whether we should finance or not agriculture. As long as the situation is more complex. I remember when I was commissioner and I visited some areas in Finland, for example, or in the Nordic countries, they insisted that they want to keep farming in some areas, even if the productivity is not so high as, I don't know, in the Central Europe plains. So in a lot of our regions or member states, agriculture play also a social role in the sense that the agriculture activity keep farmers and keep people in some areas in which without agriculture it will be a social desert. So this is why we have to combine our tools in order, first of all, to give to the farmers the possibility to produce in all these areas and to look on different markets, because we talk about theoretical common market, but in fact in food sector we have different type of market. We have some local markets, we have some more larger market with the big distribution with supermarkets. We have an international market, and which is very important for European Union, because without export, a lot of our sector will not be competitive, and we cannot keep this sector. So we should think to this reality and to combine social objectives with competitiveness and with good management of natural resources. For me, these are interconnected. We cannot have agriculture without fertile soil, without water, clean water and enough water, even without biodiversity, as we cannot have farming in Europe without farmers, not only in very productive areas, but also in mountain areas, in more remote regions. And we should think to our tools in order to keep some common rules for our European market, but to give them to the farmers the possibility to choose the specific adapted tools in order to keep their activity.
Yeah, Marco, the Commission in the past, or in member states, the Parliament, every time they try to increase environmental ambition with the Green Deal, with the Farm to Fork strategy, trying to tie the cap towards those objectives, it seems the ambition is always kind of hitting a political bit of a pressure. Yeah. How do you address that? It's something that I think everyone here mentioned, but when this vision hits politics, hits political reality, how do you push it forward?
The concern we have is precisely that this cap, as the previous one as well, is providing member states an incredible amount of power in terms of deciding how to spend the money. Member states have, not only they can decide whether to give 130 or 240 euros per hectare to farmers. It's almost twice as much. So there is already there only for hectare base without any string attached to that. But then they can also define the new conditionality, the new greening rules can be defined by member states. And unfortunately, looking at the history of the majority of member states, the way in which money has been spent, we don't have a lot of positive elements to say we can be sure that money will be given as an incentive to farmers to, again, transition and provide a farming production that is much more sustainable. But I wanted to come back a bit on a social aspect, which, as I said at the beginning, this proposal is actually trying to address, also via degressivity and capping, which are very highly hot political topics, which I don't think we have time to discuss now. But it's interesting, we need to also realize how different agriculture is. Commissioner Charles comes from Romania, I come from Italy. Jens, you come from Germany, I think. Mm-hmm. We have realities that are radically different, but we also within sectors. 65% of farmers produce 8,000 euros a year in terms of output. 3% produce more than 250,000, and 0.2% produces more than 500,000 per year in output. That reality, that divergent reality must be addressed. And in that sense, in the strategic dialogue, which I was part of, we reached an agreement, and the agreement was, let's give, as a social policy, a certain amount of payments within the cap to farmers that are not productive, that are not successful businesses, but just for the sake of ensuring that they remain in local areas and they populate rural areas. And I stand for that.
And unfortunately, we don't find this kind of indicators in the legislative proposal that the Commission put on the table. So this is another example of difference between a vision and what we put on the table when we come with legislative proposals.
It's almost like trying to compromise to do a little bit of everything. And you mentioned capping and degressivity, Marco. I remember the Commission speaking about looking even further ahead than 2028 towards the big enlargement that could happen with Ukraine. Capping and degressivity, it's a proposal that the Commission has tried to come forward with many times in the past. This time they're saying, oof, maybe it will help convince member states because of Ukrainian agriculture. Mr. Chalos, you've spoken before about the challenges of integrating Ukraine into the EU. It's a big agricultural powerhouse. Yeah,
the direct payment, it's not enough to be solved in order to have more clarity about how we'll integrate Ukraine. Ukraine is a big piece, and in my opinion, we have to think out of the box in the case of Ukraine. And to find a tailored and adapted solution working together with them. And in my opinion, we should start now to discuss about that. First of all, to see the reality on the spot and to have proper data about the situation on the spot, because Ukraine is not only about very big farms and big agri-food complex. There are also small and medium-sized farms. Ukraine lost a part of their international market, and Russia weaponized the food on this market. So we should help Ukraine to recover this market, and then to propose to them a long transition. And I think we can find a win-win solution, but if we approach the subject in a rational and pragmatic way, and not only with political fears. And because of political fears, we don't want to open sensitive subjects.
We're almost out of time, so I just wanted to turn to each of you. Name one change Brussels could make soon, quickly, that would make Europe's food system more secure, more sustainable, more competitive. What's the one change? Maybe starting with Jens.
From my point of view, regulatory simplification.
Marco.
Faster access to innovation.
From my point of view, it starts having the guts to deal with demand-side policies, because the two dependencies we have from feed from South America and the US and synthetic fertilizers from Russia and Belarus are based on the enormous amount of animals that we need to feed, and we don't have the land to do it.
For me, it's to put in coherence our objective as strategic autonomy in the food sector and trade policy that we have. If we don't have coherence among that, we invest a lot of money in agriculture, but will not have a result.
Thank you, and that's all the time we have. Please remain seated. Up next, we'll have my colleague Jan Cieński here on stage for a conversation with Andrius Kubilus, the EU Commissioner for Defense and Space. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to all the panelists.
Hello again, and welcome back to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name is Jan Chansky, and I'm a senior policy editor in charge of defense policy at Politico. And I'm delighted to close our summit today with the best for last, Andris Kubilius, the EU Commissioner for Defense and Space. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. And I guess I'll jump right in with an issue that we were both at the Warsaw Security Forum earlier this week, and it's an issue that sort of popped up today here as well. The Commission has talked about building a drone wall. It was part of Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union speech a few weeks ago. There seems to be some confusion about the scale, the speed, the cost of this thing. Can you bring us up to speed? What does the Commission actually have in mind when you talk drone wall?
Well, definitely we do not have in mind, how to say, traditional wall.
So it's not Europe's Maginot Line?
No. Well, first of all, what we need to have in mind. First of all, Commission President, of course, she named drone wall as part of Eastern Flank Watch. That is title of broader, defense concept. How the border with Russia can be better defended from EU side, from member state side, and those initiatives were coming perhaps since even last year. Here was an initiative by interior ministers of so-called exactly drone wall, how to have more capacities to protect border against illegal migration. During the summertime, if I'm correct, during July, defense ministers of Poland and Baltic states appealed to Commission with, at that time it was called Baltic Defense Line or something like that, and they asked exactly support for two major components. One is, ground wall. We can say something like Maginot Line, but maybe more modern, which would allow to have all the contra-mobility measures on the ground, like anti-tank trenches, like those Dragon Ts, which, as it was shown, the recent practice in Ukraine, that is quite effective, if that is built smart. But second also was what the ministers asked, to have something like drone wall equipment. And the evaluation of, at least if you look into their paper, evaluation was that for those countries, Poland and Baltic states, some kind of this drone wall equipment, first of all, detection systems, because you need to have radars, special radars, you can have acoustic sensors, and then, of course, equipment to destroy drones like anti-drone interceptors, like electronic warfare means, like traditional, Zenit artillery or machine guns. The cost was around of 1 billion euros. So after provocation against Poland, when we saw everybody around of almost 20 drones were sent to Poland, definitely this topic of drone wall became very, very high in priority. And last Friday I had a video conversation with the ministers from this frontline, what we call frontline countries, and also Danish minister was participant. And there was very strong wish and will really to build those capacities, because what this provocation against Poland have shown, what drones intrusions into my country, into Lithuania, into Romania, are showing that we lack really capabilities to detect drones, and then really to have cost-effective capabilities to destroy drones. Reaction to provocation against Poland was very effective from NATO point of view. Aircrafts, were immediately scrambled up. But the means which were used to destroy drones, million value missiles, perhaps is not what we need really to have. So we see clearly perspective to build this, what we call now drone wall. Whatever, we can change the title if some misunderstanding is coming from that. Quite quickly, especially some initial stages like really building detection capacities. And it would be good to have this as a regional project in order that those detection systems would communicate in between of each other, in order to have for us clear picture. And well, some experts are saying that the whole drone wall in its significant built during 1 year period. I think that for detection capabilities, it's even less what is needed.
Now, when you were on that panel in Warsaw and with Boris Pistorius, the German defense minister, he wasn't anti-drone wall, but he was skeptical if this was the best use of limited resources. We heard similar concerns from French President Emmanuel Macron today, who was also wondering about the feasibility and the priorities on the drone wall. Are you worried that there's a lack of political buy-in, or that there's skepticism on some countries as to whether the EU should go ahead on this scale and speed with a project like this?
Well, I see. Well, of course, discussions always are good, and we shall discuss. And the same Pistorius, he said, less, to defend against drones is important, but he was maybe wondering what is that project really about. I would say, first of all, NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte repeatedly said, this is really very important to develop, and NATO themselves, they are doing some kind of testing on those frontline territories, equipment which can be the best one. Because I can repeat that we understood that our capabilities to detect drones, we have good capabilities to detect air fighters, we can, maybe we have good capabilities to detect missiles, but drones demand specific capabilities. So Mark Rutte was very strong in favor of development of such kind of project. And then I can see very clearly, some kind of, we can make conclusions. The countries which faced provocations with drones, they are very strongly, in favor of building something. The countries maybe which are still not, were not facing some kind of those problems, they are, of course, it's rational to ask the questions, but it would be strange for me if we would not build capacities to defend ourselves now against the weapons which Russians are using, in the war against Ukraine, and what Ukrainians are saying that Ukrainians are good in drones and electronic warfare, but they recognize that Russians are as good as Ukrainians. And at the moment, I saw one NATO country, European one, which published recently very important document, so-called strategic review of their defense strategy, defense doctrine, and that is the United Kingdom, where they put very clearly in strategic perspective what should be their defense or military doctrine. And they used a very interesting title, 20-40-40. 40% of targets should be hit by light drones, by kamikaze drones, another 40 by heavy drones, and only 20% by traditional heavy technique. And this is exactly what Ukrainians are saying about their experience. 80% of targets are hit by drones.
So what do you think looking at what happened in Poland, the overflight in Romania, what's happening in Denmark, the German reports from today about their tracking of these overflights of the drones. What's going on? Are these probes by Russians? Are these disconnected things where there's no strong proof of Russian involvement, but people are jumping to conclusions? What do you think is happening?
Well, I think that this is, deliberate provocation or testing what Russia did, especially when we're talking about Polish experience. Those were not lost drones, because of electronic warfare, instruments used by, for example, by Ukraine. It's very clear that, drones had special, fuel, tanks, much larger in order to fly exactly towards, distance of Poland. And, well, we can guess, what is the aim of such kind of provocation. Is that testing of our abilities, how we're able to detect and to defend ourselves. So really we see the problems which we need to resolve. So in some way we can, I don't know if that would be proper word to say, we can be grateful. We've shown what are our problems. The question is why we were not, paying enough of attention during the previous, at least 2 years when drones started to be used very, very intensively in the war against Ukraine. And second question is that what is next? And I would not be surprised if we shall see bigger scale of those provocations. Still, how to say, being below Article 5. And even if we shall build our capacities to destroy those drones, always will be the question, what is our political answer? Right. And what we need also to see, that the goal can be also in some way of Russian side psychological. Because what I saw being in Warsaw and talking with people and talking with media, definitely when the country is getting, 20 drones intrusion into the territory, people are simply becoming nervous because they don't know what is next. And that is why definitely the governments and all of us, we need to build real capacities to defend ourselves, to destroy those drones, whatever numbers will come, in order really to show our people that they can be safe and not be nervous each day, waiting what next can come.
In Warsaw, the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, said there was some sort of a war had already begun. You're saying that it's very difficult to know, but there could be more provocations. In light of that, how confident are you of the backing of the United States, of the US involvement and interest in European security under Donald Trump? Is this still a reliable ally?
Well, I would not discuss maybe about reliability. Sometimes, of course, we are discussing what does it mean, what they are saying. But we need to, as Europeans, we need to rationally accept the logic of Americans. When they are asking us that Europeans, you should take much more of responsibility on European defense, because they, as Americans, they see other challenges, global challenges like rising Chinese military power, and they need to shift their resources towards Indo-Pacific. So we should not look into such kind of perspective with a lot of emotion, that we cannot, trust Americans and so on. This is new stage, new global development, stage, which we need to understand and we need to accept, and we need to build our capabilities also, having in mind that we shall need not only to defend ourselves against possibility of Russian aggression, but also that we shall need to replace American assets which they were keeping here. And maybe we can agree, we can look for agreement with Americans on some kind of calendar issues. How they will, shift their resources towards Indo-Pacific, when it will come, because, definitely for replace their capabilities, we shall need to invest. It will take time, and so on and so on.
The EU's pushed through the 150 billion euro safe launch weapons program. You're working on the final trilogues on the EDIP program. Is that enough? Should the EU look to create a common defense market? Is there more that can be done to try to make the defense market more efficient, to step in and fill the gaps that the Americans leave behind?
Well, I would say that since the beginning of this commission, and my job as commissioner, we spent those months building what I call opportunities for member states to develop their capabilities. Financial opportunities, like you mentioned, SAFE, some kind of the industrial policy instruments like EDIP, legal, diminishing bureaucracy with omnibus on simplification. Now time comes for next stage, which I call delivery. And here is exactly where important role will be played by so-called roadmap on defense readiness, which is now started to informally to be discussed in the UCO and then at the end of October.
Which the leaders talked about today, right?
Yeah, today, yeah. And then, formal decisions should be made later at the end of October. And this roadmap should very clearly, needs to have very clearly timelines. When and what we need to deliver. So more or less we know what we need to deliver, from NATO capability targets. We need to have aggregated demand picture.
So drilling down to the specifics, like air defenses or artillery or ammunition. So you've got actual targets that this.
We now have those 9 areas of strategic domains. I'm looking that we need even more specifically say in that domain what kind of weapons we need to develop. Then we need to have we shall look for some kind of mapping of production capabilities. How much we can produce. If there is shortage, then we need to use our instruments from EDIP how to support expansion of production. So that would be very important. And then of course second question is how to deliver in the most effective way. Who is playing what role? What national governments, what role they're playing? What role is played by Commission, by ES, by European Defence Agency? Again, we need to have very clear institutional understanding. And then the last question, of course, will be how to finance. So what we did with safe loans is important, but definitely 150 billion is not enough. Looking into the future, I'm quite assured that we shall have really big defense financial resources from national defense spending. If to take into account that member states pledge to spend 3.5%, and they will reach that target before 2035, I am taking next MFF period, 8 years or 7 years, from 2028 till 2035. If we shall accept that member states for that period can spend around of 3% of GDP in average, at first lower than larger numbers, 3% annually from EU member states will be around of 600 billion per year. 7 years it will bring 4.2 trillion euros. Okay, not all money will be spent on equipment, salaries, pensions, around of 50% can be. But nevertheless, we shall have quite a big amount of money, 2 trillion, for example. The problem is that those money we need to have now, not before 2035, because we are speaking about defense readiness 2030, not just for some kind of symbolism, but because we know that Putin can wage an aggression against us, against the NATO member states. It will take for him next 3 or 5 years to be ready. So that's why we need to be ready to defend ourselves much sooner. And we need to find a way how we can, I would call front load maybe those money, but that's, again, the question for what I call for financial engineers, to find the best way.
And I guess also to better coordinate procurement so that you're not wasting money so that these things are...
Absolutely. This is what we need to keep in mind always. What I'm saying is that while building our defense capabilities through production, through procurement, on national level, we need to keep in mind also structural problems of European defense industry, which were very well described by Draghi in his report. It's fragmentation of the industry, it's lack of single market, and that is why our industry is not able to use power of big market to develop their competitiveness, then we are losing in global competition and so on and so on.
What role do you see for third countries? This has been a sort of a tricky political issue. How wide do you open the door to the UK, to Canada, maybe to Turkey? How do you exclude a lot of the US? Does that create political blowback from the Americans? How do you see that whole debate shaping up?
Well, I will not maybe tell all the details. The last safe regulation is most open, regulation which we have had for participation of third countries. Now, negotiations with Canada and the UK on those bilateral agreements, technical agreements, are going on. I hope that they will be successful. And it means that Canadian and UK defense industry will be considered like European. That is one thing. With other countries, of course, there are specific issues. There are possibilities for industries which belong to United States, for example, if they are established in Europe, really to participate. But what we need to remember, what I am saying always to our American colleagues, that they need to remember that European Union money spent from the budget or like safe loans are just a small part which will be spent in Europe on defense, because majority of money will come from member states. Like I said, we shall have maybe during, till 2035, more than 2 trillion euros, which member states will spend on defense, when our next projection to MFF is that we shall have, for space and defense around 130 billion euros, which means that for defense we shall have around 50 or 60 billion euros. So on one side we have 2 trillion, on the other side we have 50 billion, and national defense spending is not regulated at all by EU. If member states will decide that they want to buy American weapons, they will buy. We can incentivize them with our EDIP program and with our finances in the budget to incentivize them to spend money in a joint procurement, maybe more for European production, but that is only incentivization, not a regulation.
We're running out of, or have run out of time, so I'll just ask you one last short question. Are we going to be able to do this in time? I mean, the intelligence assessments say that Russia, as you'd said, could be ready to attack in 4 or 5 years. You come from a frontline country. Are you confident that within those 4 or 5 years, Europe can do the job and actually stand up for itself?
I'm absolutely sure that we can do the job, but definitely everybody needs to understand that it demands different approach, different speed in our political decisions, in negotiations, in debates in the parliament or in the council. That is what is needed. Everything else, I am absolutely sure we can do. We can learn a lot from Ukraine, which builds their capabilities during the war. So for us, it's better to build our capabilities before the war.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking part in the panel. And thank you very much for hanging on till the end and for a very interesting conversation.
Okay.
Thanks
a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging on till the end. I think the key takeaway from today's session is there was, when Mario Draghi did his report about a year ago, there were fears that this would be one of these sort of worthy reports that would gather dust on a shelf. And I think that today's session and what we've heard from panels is it's clear that that those worries were perhaps overblown, that Europe has woken up, but it's also clear, as we heard from the Commissioner now, that there's still an awful lot to do, that the time to compete in a much more tooth and claw type of world, whether it comes to agriculture, to trade, to energy, and to defense, that Europe really has to wake up on a host of different fronts and reorganize itself. I think another theme that really came through in today's panels is that there is still this desire, while making Europe more efficient, working better, is to retain innate characteristics of Europe. That came through with the European Central Bank Vice President Luis de Guindos, who said, simplify, don't deregulate. So I think the message coming through is that don't expect a massive revolution. You want to improve the functioning, but not completely junk it. I think that, that came through again with the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister, Taras Kachka, who welcomed the effort to streamline procedures to join the bloc, but it's clear that Ukraine wants to join a functioning EU and not one that's undergone a dramatic revolution. And again, as we heard from the Commissioner and from the Defense Procurement Panel earlier today, is the overall conclusion is that Europe is awake but has to move much faster. On that note, I'd like to thank all the speakers who took part in the first day of the summit, as well as the moderators and the crew, and again to thank the partners for making the summit possible. Leading partners ASML, Bayer, EFPIA, and Google. Presenting partners Lilly, DP World, Revolut, and Santander. And knowledge partners McKinsey Global Institute. We are excited, and I hope that you're excited as well, that having lasted for so long, there's a happy hour reception where you can get some drinks, and that'll be held from now until 7 p.m. in the main networking room. We hope to see you there, and we also look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for day 2 of the summit. Thanks again.